Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. You are in a different time zone. Week number one, Q&A, part one. I don't think elementary programming is very difficult subject, so I really appreciate you coming. But I think later on, when we get to the more complicated stuff, I think each statement might be slightly more complicated, but once we get to loops and also object orientation, I think those will be maybe require more of your attention. But we'll hold a weekly Q&A as usual. All right. Let me just start with something over here. So also, Ashkan got similar question there before the session get recorded. So I will clarify that as well. So what should be your learning focus for this week? So remember last Friday, right? Last Friday we released Java tutorial. Sorry, let me use different color here. So last week, Friday, we released Java tutorials week number 2, right? That's what we did. And then I would say every time once the tutorial series is released, I would say plan your time to get started. You should always start with the Java tutorial first, because typically you don't really, I'm simply just guiding you about typing the code into Eclipse and then try to explain some rationale about how to use it. So I think that'll be easier to follow. Whereas maybe in the lecture, for example, typically I'll release the lecture by early Monday. But if I can release earlier on Sunday, I'll try that, because some of you might be interested in starting earlier, but it's not required. So I would say do the tutorial first and then do the lecture. But feel free to actually interleave the videos. For example, if you got, for example, these videos for your weekly tutorial videos, and you got these videos for your let's say lecture, feel free to actually say, I watch this one first and go for that one, and then go back and then go here, right? It doesn't matter, right? As long as you try to digest chunk by chunk for each one of them, you'll be okay. All right, and then I want to say that for your week number 2, both the lecture and also for the weekly Java tutorial video, there is a very important concept which I introduced right away called debugger. I remember one of you actually asked me about if you can use visualizer when you program, and your fellow students show a very exciting tool that's actually a web-based tool that supports Java and Python, maybe other language, during the Q&A session. I would say this debugger here is more or less what you guys were talking about. So this is really something that you really want to get used to about using debugger, okay? So I would say, for those of you who already started the Java tutorials or the lecture, you will know what I'm talking about, right? You will gradually see. I really try to introduce to you properly about how to use debugger, right? So the idea will be you're trying to visualize the execution. Visualize the execution of your code. And then number 2, this is the most important part. You're actually visualizing the execution in slow motion. And when I say slow motion, that means there are 3 debugger operations you can actually apply when you're trying to visualize the code. One is called step over, and the second one is step in, step into, and also step out or step return. So these are the fundamental operations you need to understand in order to actually use debugger. And I explain all of them actually in details and also show you practices in both the lecture and the Java tutorial video. So while you're completing this week's lecture and also tutorial videos, you want to focus on this, all right? And debugger is really something like a technique in order for you to really debug your code. It's not something you can just get completed and submit, right? It's not something like that. Like when I show you if statement code, you can type something out concrete, tangible. But for the debugger, it's really more like soft skills you want to get used to as a good programmer, as a disciplined programmer. So this is really something I will emphasize throughout the course. All right. All right, so now that's about the this week, and then I'm just going to go over the questions you guys put on the Google Doc, and then I will just go over them one by one. Okay, and then let's see if you got any follow-up questions. Please just interrupt, and then I'll be happy to answer. All right. All right, let's now go over question by question. So guys, for those of you who actually put the question on the Google Doc, try to put them earlier, because normally I look at them around Sunday evening or Monday morning. So for those of you who actually put a little bit later, or maybe even just right before the session, I may not be able to see them. So just in case your questions are not really covered by whatever that's appearing on my iPad, please just speak up, and then I'll be happy to answer. Right? I'm just didn't get it in time. All right, let's get guys. Any question about what I have said so far? Any question you want to ask me? You can speak up before I start the Q&A. Anybody? So I would say the flow, the formats for the Q&A is not really formal. It's very casual, very informal, right? So typically, that's why I ask you guys to actually put some questions on the Google Doc. So at least we got some basis to have discussion. But I would say anytime you see any relevant point that's raised by your fellow students, you can always interrupt and then to ask some follow-up questions. I think that's how things should go, right, for the Q&A. All right, so now let me start. All right. I think the first two questions, I try to reorganize the order a little bit, so it's kind of easier for me to flow. The first two is more about your programming tests. So for your programming tests, according to the calendar, you can look at that. It's still about maybe 2 or 3 weeks away, right? Look at your calendar. So for the programming tests, number 1, right? So you can expect to really receive a guide, like a guidance, by the end of this week. By the end of this week, I'm going to make a guidance, like a preparation guide, and maybe some practice problem together with you. I'm working on that, and then we're going to, you can look at that and then try to practice for that. So you got at least 1 week to 10 days to get prepared for your programming test. All right, but by then, I think the best preparation would be complete your lab number 1 and also lab number 2, which is going to be released this coming Friday. But we may not be able to grade your lab number 2 in time for your programming test 1. However, we will release the solution for your lab, so you don't have to worry. You can always look at the solution and try to learn from that, right? All right, so now let's take a look at the first question here. Will our code documentation be evaluated on our lab programming test submissions? Remember, we talked about there are 2 ways you can write comments in Java. You can either say single line comments, or you can write maybe multi-line comments, right? Something like that. Do you have to write such comments in your programming tests or labs? I would say in principle, no. In principle, I think the comments there are really for you as a programmer to really document your design or implementation decision. So anybody who needs to maybe take over your code for any further extension, I'm talking about the real situation in the workplace. In that case, documentation will be very crucial. However, for this course, we don't really have the resources to really evaluate the quality of your documentation. So I would say it would be really up to you to really document your test or to document your lab. So it's really your call, right? It's your decision. If you didn't do it, no penalty, all right? However, I'm not sure if we'll get to this maybe later in the course. There's a way to really do documentation more formally in Java called JavaDoc, right? Maybe some of you have heard about it, just JavaDoc, the Java way of doing documentation. So basically, you write some special form comments in your Java code, and then you can generate HTML documentation pages. This might be something we can get into maybe later in the course, but it's not the focus, right? So this one will be something we might get into, but for now you don't have to worry. All right, so the direct answer is no, you don't have to worry about writing comments in your test or in your lab. However, you may just want to consider writing them for your own good. All right. Okay, so now the second question here, do we need to add comments to our code for labs or programming tests, right? Okay, just answer that. It's not required, but you should for your own good, right? All right, so now, guys, any question about these 2 questions, any follow-up? Mohammed actually got a question here on the chat. Let me answer him as well. Although Arman already answered pretty well already. So for this week's lab, do we have to complete the tutorial videos? Yeah, let me clarify this, right? Remember, for your lab number 0, we ask you, right, think about the lab, right? So we got Java tutorial video, right? About roughly about 2 hours every week, right? As I explained the syllabus. So for lab number 0, you are supposed to complete week number 1, and then we set submission is actually required, right? That's for your lab 0. However, later on, for all the subsequent labs, for lab number 1, lab number 2, all the way to lab number 8, there will be some associated, for example, for lab number 1, we actually got week number 2. And later on for lab number 2, we may got just week number 3 as well, right? And so on. So the question really is, do you really have to watch them, right? So you can also refer to the lab number 1 instruction there. I said that there very clearly as well. So I would say it's not required, okay, in the sense that we don't require for submission. However, I would say I created those videos really for your learning. So I would say you really, you may just want to consider watching them. And that will, for those of you, especially I believe the vast majority for the class would be beginners to Java. So the reason for creating these weekly tutorial videos is really to really get your standing points for starting the lab more like a higher. So you will be able to complete the labs more easily. So that's the rationale. What is the difference between a programming test and a lab? A lab is like a programming assignment, right? You simply, I think the formats will be very similar. The formats, I think for you just follow instructions about how to really start it and also get it submitted. I think for your convenience, I try to make the programming test and also the lab. The formats for the methods you have to complete will be very similar. So just to less things for you to worry about. So I would say programming test definitely is going to take place between 2 days. You can look at the calendar for your syllabus, and for the lab, you actually got a whole week, sometimes 2 weeks to do it. But for the programming test, you only got 90 minutes, right? Okay, not within 2 hours, but actually within 90 minutes. All right, just to clarify, right? We said that. And don't cheat. Very good, guys. I like that. Yes. All right, guys. Any more questions you want to ask me before I move on? Everybody's okay? Yeah, I will try to catch up with the chat. But if something that goes too quickly, I may just focus on my agenda and then I'll get back to the chat later. All right. Let's now move on to the next question here. Okay. If I'm not too sure what your fellow student here really mean. If you're the one who posted the questions, you can maybe help me out. So the question was, are there any other keywords that are like final? I'm not exactly sure what this question is. I don't think the question is about asking how many keywords there are in Java language. I don't think that's a question. I will try to understand exactly. The student who actually posted the question, are you here? If you're here, you can feel free to speak up. You can help me clarify what you're asking. Otherwise, I can only try to guess. Okay. So the final keyword over here, for example, if we say final and then double, right? And then we have, let's say pi, right? That's an example we did in the lecture, let's say. Okay, so we say that double over here is a data type, and one of your fellow students actually got some confusion about data type, which I'll explain in the next page. So this is called data type, right? And this is a variable name, right? And the right hand and the equal sign over here is the assignment operator. And the 3.14 over here, you can think in general is simply the source for assignments. The source for the assignment, sometimes people like to talk about is simply the right-hand side of the assignment, right? I spoke about it already in the lecture. And then for 3.14 specifically, is simply just directly a number you're writing out. So it's also this is also a floating point literal. So for every data type, you actually got a way to really write literal, which means you just write out the value directly. And for double, you can have 3.14. And for integer, what can be the literal? For example, if you simply write 1, 2, maybe 0, -1, so these are literals, right? And also we got character literal. So character will be maybe just 1, and also maybe 2, and also maybe the @ sign here, and also string literal as well, right? We talk about it in your elementary programming. So now get back to the question itself. So we talk about the final keyword over here. So people call this the modifier over here. It's called a modifier. You can think about in some way informally. Only this part over here. This part over here, we are really declaring a variable pi of type double. And the extra final keyword over here, we are basically trying to modify the definition for this variable a little bit to say whatever value you actually initialize the variable to be, it should be the final one. So effectively, we are declaring a name constant, right? So you can think about the final here. That's also something I try to explain in the lecture. You can think about for this particular modifier, this is to say once initialized cannot be reassigned. And if you recall in lecture week number 1, so let's say once you declare final double pi is initialized to be 3.14, and then if you simply say I simply got some follow-up reassignments. If I simply say pi, now rather than 3.14, it's going to be reassigned to be 3.14 like that, right? You cannot really do the reassignments for any name constant that's declared to be final. So this will be compiler time error. So that's something also you should know. All right. Okay, I think that's the best I can answer to your fellow student about the final keyword. Maybe they just want to clarify, okay, or maybe it's something else. All right. Any follow-up question to this, guys? Any more? Anyone? Okay, let me move on to the next one. It's a little bit more about some clarification. Is the main method the starting point of executing your program? Yes, if you want to run the console application, right? Only for console application or for all the Java program like a model and JUnit test, right? So I think it's worth clarifying over here. Whenever you want to execute your program, right? So I would say as far as what we have done so far, right? And also I'll try to keep the same structure throughout the course. There are 2 categories of classes you can execute for your program, right? The first category is the JUnit test. This will be the first category. If you simply want to run, all the test cases for your software. So over here, you'll simply right-click on the class and say run as JUnit test. Right, so we have done this actually for your lab number 0 tutorial videos already. And let's talk about your lab number 1 and all the subsequent labs. So we also gave you all the test cases for all the methods you are supposed to implement. So now, in order for you to know whether you're going to perform well for the lab, you have to right-click something called, I think it's called test utilities. .java, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to right-click on that. And then after that, you're going to say run as JUnit test, right? And then it's going to tell you either a green or a red. Initially, you're just going to get a red bar, right, in the Eclipse, right, saying that there's at least one test case that actually fell. But of course, in the beginning, everything fell because you haven't implemented anything. Eventually, what you really want to get is you actually want to get a green bar eventually. Right? That's what you want to aim for. So this will be the case where you want to execute your Java code in the JUnit test folder. Okay. Another scenario. So this will be scenario number 1. Okay, where you can execute the JUnit test. Scenario number 2 will be if you simply just want to interact, let your program interact with the user. So this will be the model package. That's really what you have to worry about. Right? You can think about here. Let's just give you one example. let's say if you got circle app dot Java, and how do you know if a particular class is a console app? So I would say for this course, you will just see main method, right? You will see the main method, and also you will see the declaration of scanner. And then you will see things like an input dot, maybe next int, right? That's something we have seen, well, next double. And also you will see things like a system.out print line. So system.out print line. So if you see a particular class that has these characteristics, so that means it's a console application. So now, how can you execute a console application? You will simply, again, right-click on this, and then you're going to say run as Java application. Right? You can see in both cases, you have the right-click, but one is to run as Java application. The other one is to run as JUnit test. So these are the two cases you have to worry about for this course. Later on, once we get to lab number 7 and lab number 8, where you have to develop some Android app, but we'll get there. In that case, things might change a little bit. But at least before that point, I think that these are the two scenarios you have to worry about, right? So there are two possible entry point of execution for your projects. One will be simply the JUnit test. And another one will be simply the main method for some console application class. All right, any question about this clarification over here? Any question? Anyone? So I'll take silence as a yes, right? You guys are okay. All right. Next one. All right, so now this is something similar. Okay, so your fellow student over here was asking, let's read it, regarding the separation of concerns over here, okay? So really the separation of concern, we got 3 concerns over here, basically, right? We got testing automatically using JUnit test. That's concern number 1. Concern number 2, we want to have a program that can read the input from the keyboard and also to output to the console. So that's concern number 2. Concern number 3, we want to have classes where you can define utility methods. You can think about each utility method is actually going to program the logic for your application, maybe to calculate the circle area, maybe to calculate the average of maybe arithmetic sequence, and etc. Right? So these are the 3 concerns. Let me write it down. Okay. So over here, you can think about 3 concerns. Number 1, you want to the logic of application. So this will be in the model. All right. And number 2, automated. The auto testing of utility, I'll say util methods. So these will be included in JUnit test. And then number 3, concern number 3, is about interacting with the user manually. Interacting with user. And here, when I say user, so how can the user actually interact with your program? So to input, they got keyboard. To output, they can see the console, right? So it's basically keyboard and console. Right? It's one for input, the other one for output over here. And then so all the relevant console applications are included in console apps package. Okay, I don't need to say package over here, right? It's a bit too big. Do it again. All right, so there's a separation of concern. Let me just remind you. So that's something you should know from week number 1. And then let's now see what your fellow student questions are. Why is the model package explicitly stated to have classes? Okay, I see what your fellow student really mean. Okay, so I think it is true for every package over here, each one of them consists of classes for sure. Okay. However, the class that resides in each package serve different purposes. I think that's really what I meant to say. Okay. So let me just review very quickly, right? So for the JUnit tests, you definitely got classes for sure. However, each one of them is for testing purpose. all right, just for testing, right? So that means the way you test is by using assertions. And so far, we only showed you assert equals. And later on, we might be able to show you more. But I think assert equals can do much testing already. So we are good for now. All right. And also for console applications, we also got classes for sure. Each console application is itself a class that has the main method. And then this is really for, you can think about for interaction. Okay, so in the interaction is going to be keyboard and also console, right? So that's enough. Okay, and then for the model over here, it's neither for testing nor for interaction. It's for something else. That's why we said say separation of concern. The model also got classes. Okay, however, each class is going to be for the collection of utility methods. You can think about each utility methods is more like a box, right? I also try to visualize this in the tutorial, or I think in the tutorial. You can think about each method over there is like a black box, because somehow from the user's point of view, whatever that's inside is kind of invisible to the user. So basically for each box, you got the input over here. Also, you got the output. And the syntax for that would be, let me just write it down here, just for one example. So you got something called public, static, and also let's say double, and then get area. And then over here, let's say double. Of course, the type for the input and output may not be the same, right? Just happen to be the same in this case. Double and also radius over here. Okay, you can think about this part over here. The radius here is the input, or people like to call that sometimes parameters. Okay, I also talked about it. And then the double over here is the type for the output, or the type for return. Right? You can think about the input over here correspond to the input over here, and the output over here correspond to the output over here conceptually, right? So you can think about for every method you're trying to define inside the model, at least before the reading week, because after the reading week, we are going to relax this notion about static. Remember, static simply means you can call the method by just using the class. For example, you might say utilities dot get area, right? You can directly use the, for example, 23. You can directly use the class name in order to call the function or the method. However, after the reading week, once we start introducing object orientation, this may not be the case anymore. So sometimes you may want to create certain methods where you have to explicitly create some objects, but that's something we'll talk about after the reading week. For now, you don't have to worry, all right? For now, you just have to know that under the model package over here, we also got classes, right? In that case, every class is going to define a collection of utility methods, something like that. And the way you can think about it abstractly is every method is more like a black box, where there is certain computation that's done inside the box. And then the box will take some input and take some output something as well, all right? Okay, I think that's about the clarification for this question here. Any follow-up question to this? Any questions? Everybody okay? All right. Next one. So here, your fellow student said, I'm a bit confused about syntax error number 3, which are included below. For example, how do we know where to align the ending curly brackets? All right. I think it's a good question here. Am I going too fast? So guys, if you think I'm going too fast, please slow me down. You can always ask me to go back. I can slow down, but I try to pause. Okay, let me pause a bit. Any previous part you would like me to clarify, if that doesn't make sense to you, any part so far? I can wait for you. That's okay, but you got to tell me what you think.
Professor.
Yes, please.
I asked a question, and I think you answered it very well. I just want to clarify. So
Sure.
you're saying that like each package has its own, actually has classes, of course.
Correct.
But like the one model it's like, because it's utility methods, it's like a collection of possibilities of different methods, right? It's like you
Correct.
said, it's a black box. So it's like, it can do a lot of different things. So that's why you're saying for model it has classes. Okay.
Ah, I see. So I think the reason I only put, yeah, if you refer back to your notes, I think the reason that I only mention classes for the model is because that class is really somehow the class that contains the real methods for computation. On the other hand, you can, well, let's say strictly speaking, you can say for JUnit test, for example, you also got classes, and also the class also got methods. However, those methods are for testing purpose only. It's not really for you to program the logic of your application. Similarly, for the console apps package, they also got classes. And guess what? They also got method. And also they only got one main method. However, the main method is really for you to define the interaction pattern with the user about when to prompt the user for input and when to call utility method and also when to output something back to the console. So I would say the reason I emphasize about class over here is that's the only kind of class you would define on the model that will actually program the logic of your application. I think that's really what I meant to say.
I see. Okay. Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right, guys. Anything else?
Professor, one of them asked about protect class versus public class void.
Oh, protect. Protect class versus public class. I would say, yeah. Okay. I believe the keyword's protected class and also public class. Okay, like that. Okay, I would say as far as this course is concerned, you don't have to worry about it. It's not going to be covered in this course. All right, and let me talk about public. There's something a little bit more relevant to this course over here. All right, for the public class over here, you're basically saying that it can be used across packages. I will demonstrate this to you in just a moment. Across packages. Okay, for example, conceptually, let's say this. Imagine that your project, package explorer. So let's say package explorer, right, in Eclipse, and then let's say we got, let's say for your some project, I would say my projects. Okay, let's say under that we actually got 3 packages. So you can get maybe you got package number 1. Package number 1. And also you got package number 2. Let me just 2 packages, just for example. All right. So now under the package, you can have as many classes as you like, as many as you like. Let me just say A and B. Let's say we got class A over here. We got class B over here, right? Each one of them can make use of each other, basically, right? That's in general. But now, in order for A to really use B, let's say in order for A to really use B, you're basically crossing from package number 1 to package number 2. In order to use this, there is some requirements. And the requirement is the B, class B, should be public. So this is the requirements, okay? Let me try to see if I can demonstrate that to you very quickly, right? I think normally we would just, by default, we simply just put the classes as public. But if you get rid of the public, so that means that the class just cannot be used outside its current package. All right, so let me just try this over here on the Eclipse together with you. All right, let's say I got some package over here. Let's say it's for the Q&A for week number 1. And then let me try this. Let me try to use the package that will make sense to you. Let's say we got console apps. And then we got another package over here. Let's call that model. All right, like that. Let's say we got model over here. Let me just call it utilities. And then remember, under the model, we don't have the main method. I'll say finish over here. Okay, I'll work on that in a moment. And then under console application, I'm going to put another class over here. Let's call that maybe just my app over here. And then just with the main method, right? Just want to illustrate quickly. All right, over here, let me try something you know about. Let's say, let's not worry about the scanner for now. Okay, let me just say I just want to call the utility method. So now if I say over here utilities, let me define just one very simple method over here. Let's say I can say public and also static, and then let's say return some string, get greeting. Let's say no input over here. And then I can say string, the message I want to greet would be, let's say hello over here. And then return the message, right? Very simple method over here. That method there will always just return hello, just a string value, right? And then over here, I can do the following. I can say I want to simply call the method, right? So let's say I can declare the string over here. I want to have some message to print out to the console. Is assigned to, so now I can say utilities dot get greeting. Did I spell it? Let me see this. UTILIT T. Okay, it was a typo there. Yeah, I noticed that. Let me just rename the class quickly. Yeah. So hopefully, guys, remember how to really rename the class. You can click on that and then refactor or rename. Let me just spell that properly. All right. So that's utilities. And then we go to my app over here. Let me just uncomment that, right? So now I can say utilities dot get greeting. Okay. And notice one thing over here. You can see as soon as I say that over here, so now it's going to import model.utilities over here, right? It's going to import the class over here. All right. So now go back to our question here. So now if I go back to utilities over here, so now this is public. If I simply get rid of the public, do you see what happened here? You can see apparently this class alone is actually okay itself because you simply just define this class over here, and then I simply declare some method which might be used by other classes or other packages. Okay. However, you can see the fact that I say maybe I should leave this as an error and then put some comments here, and now make the code available to you guys today. Without declaring the class as public, only classes within the same package, in this case, within the same package, which will be model. Okay, PACKAGE. Sorry, the keyboard is not really cooperating. Package model, the same package can call its methods. Okay, that's a principle. So now if you go to where we call the method, right, you can see utilities, we are using it. So this is why it's a compile time error. Compile time error because utilities class is not declared as public. Currently, it's only restricted to the use within model package. All right, so I think that's really a good question here. So I think that's something for you to know, right? So you want to make sure if you really have to simply type out the class declaration yourself, but I think typically when you create a class from Eclipse, you will simply just add a public for you. But just in case you don't have it, you just have to realize if you simply don't really have public over here, so that means the only class that can use this particular utility class will be those classes within the model package. Okay, but for any class outside the package over here, for example, my app, they wouldn't be able to use it. The way to fix it will be you gotta add public. Okay, I think I'll leave the way it is for this setup over here. So later on, when you import a package for exercise, you will see if you will see that if you didn't do it, you will get errors. All right, guys, any question about this, about public? Any questions? Anything that's not clear to you? Feel free to speak up. All right, guys, I presume you're okay, right? Again, I might just go a little bit too fast. I agree, but I think please, you will be the one to slow me down. Just interrupt me, all right? Please. Since we're gonna tolerate each other for 12 weeks, so we better understand each other's rules. So I might go fast, but you can feel free to slow me down. That will be the rule, all right? Okay, so now let me go back to this particular guy over here. So now we just talked about basically what you guys were asking about public. Okay, so you don't have to worry about protected, right? Again, you don't need to worry about this for this course, right? That's a little bit more advanced, okay? Okay, so now let's see this. Your colleague confused about syntax error number 3, for example, how do we know where to align the ending curly brackets, right? So now let me talk about this example one more time, and then maybe I can give you more examples, all right? So let's see for this particular guy over here, right? I think it's really important to notice the so-called delimiters. So delimiter simply means how you actually separate different names or different statements in the Java. You can think about delimiter is separators, like a symbol, special symbol, separator. Okay. So now what would be the common delimiters in Java, right? You got curly brackets, like a pair, right? Curly brackets, okay? Or you got parentheses, round parentheses, or you might get square brackets over here. So these are the common ones that you have to pay attention to. I would say typically, whenever you write any opening, either opening curly brackets, opening parentheses, or opening square brackets, you should always remember, in order to really make the syntax correct, you always have to have a matching closing one over here, right? So what I'm trying to say is, so once you start your program with this, this, or this, you should always close it with this, this, or this, right? But of course, if you actually start with this, let me just write better. If you start with the opening curly brackets, but somehow you close it with square brackets, right? You got open, you got close, but they don't match. So this will be syntax error, right? That's the general idea you want to keep in mind. And now, having this in mind, let's take a look to see what's going on over here. So now you can see, typically for your Java class, you would say, I'll declare public, make it thicker, public class, class name over here, right? And then I'm going to have an opening curly brackets. So now that means you should know there is another closing curly brackets as well, right? Over here, for example, right? And then another thing is you got public static void main. So this is just a method. And then we start with some opening brackets, but somehow you're missing the closing one. The closing one is simply not there. So that's why it's actually an error, okay? So if you are the one who posted the question, do you have any follow-up question for me? I hope that's enough clarification for you before I do some more example with everybody. Anyone want to ask some follow-up question for now about the syntax error? Anyone? Everybody is okay? All right. All right, assuming that everybody is okay. So now I would suggest I just do one more example together with you, just to experiment quickly. And then I'll give you some suggestion about what you should do when you are typing classes in Eclipse. Oh, I see. Harshman. Okay, I see. Yeah, no problem. Okay, no problem. So guys, of course, unless you're shy, otherwise, always you can speak up. Always. All right. So guys, just for completeness, I would like to suggest one more thing for you. Okay, I think as a beginner, you may just may suffer from such syntax error very easily. For example, let's say this. Let's say I want to declare just another utility class. Let's say, okay. Let's say I got new and then class over here. Okay, I can say utilities two, just a class, right? Let's say I don't have the main method, just make it easier. Okay, and finish. Okay, you can see Eclipse already does it for you. You can see this is the opening curly brackets. That's the closing one, right? Very good. Okay, apparently, if you simply miss that one, it's going to complain, right? It's going to complain that this opening curly brackets here has no matching closing curly brackets. So now, if you do something a little bit different, what if I put something like this? You can see this is an opening one, this is a closing one, but they don't match. So you still got errors over here. All right. So that's just another example. Let me do one more. Okay. Another very common mistake. Let's say I want to declare some method over here. I can say public, let's say static integer, let's say get some number. Okay. And then like that. A common mistake will be, let's say, for example, you can see as soon as you type the opening parenthesis, Eclipse will also complete the closing parenthesis for you. But if for some reason you actually missed that for some reason, right? Maybe somehow you accidentally deleted it. So now get some number, for example, I can say integer I as the output, and then now I will start over here. I will start the method over here. I hit enter. All right. You can see this part right now. If I simply say return, let's say you always return I plus 1, for example. We are saying that whatever you pass as input, for example, 3, I'm just going to return 4. Every time you return, you give me some input value, I'm just going to return whatever that value is plus 1. All right. Let's now focus on the error I want you to know. You can see line number 4, you can see the error over here. That's why I put in the lab 1 instruction there very explicitly. Before you submit your lab for grading by Friday, right? You have to make sure under the problems over here, having some warnings will be okay. Warnings, actually, so far there's no warning, but if you see the yellow color warnings, that's okay. That's acceptable. However, if you see any cross, like a red errors, those are not acceptable, okay? Before you submit your lab or your test. So now you can see this one here, basically syntax error. Well, I would say for this kind of a matching problem, sometimes Eclipse is very useful. They will simply suggest what you should do in order to fix it. So here they simply say insert closing parenthesis to fix it, right? So that's one thing, all right? Another very common mistake is like this. Let me illustrate to you. So far, hopefully you're fine. So whenever you type the parameter list, you have to make sure it's enclosed within opening and closing parentheses, right? Let's do one more. Okay, one more. I would say some of you might be actually quite tempted to do the following, right? Let's say you type the opening curly brackets, and then you simply go to the next line. And then you say get, let's say return, for example, always return I plus 1. And then you can see the problem over here. Because when you actually type the opening curly brackets over here, you didn't really type the closing one right away. And then you simply go ahead and program, went ahead and program. In that case, it could be that you simply forgot to actually put this closing one, right? You might just program, you may just say, for example, let me show this to you. You might just do maybe another local variable here, integer, maybe j is assigned to I plus 1. I plus 1. And then return j over here, and then that's it, right? So now if you do it, you can see, again, we got error, pretty much like what we saw in error number 3 on the iPad. So this particular guy over here does not seem to have the matching one according to the indentation. So now, how do we fix it? What you got to fix is you have to add this closing one over here. That's what you want to add. So it's a very basic mistake you might just run into, hopefully only within lab number 1. But once you get through the first lab, and hopefully not until the second one, because for the second lab, you will be required to write some nested if statement. So in that case, having matching curly brackets will be very crucial. All right. Okay, I'll leave that over here. So now just say matching to line to the opening brackets in line number 4. And this one you can say matching to the opening curly brackets in line number 3. All right. All right, so that's about the curly brackets. Guys, any questions about syntax error of this kind? Any question? Anybody? You might be thinking about how can I possibly get into such basic error? I would say in principle, you wouldn't really get into it, but sometimes maybe you just accidentally deleted some part of your code so that the brackets, parentheses, or brackets, they simply just don't get matched anymore. So that will be the time you will have to know how to fix them. All right. Maybe we can get some example, maybe illustrated, maybe later. Okay. All right, so let me move on. All right. This one is a little bit more asking ahead, but I'll just answer a little bit briefly over here. I think your fellow student is mainly to do with about the errors I talked about in the class, right? If you recall, go to this diagram over here, development process over here. Remember this diagram over here we talked about in the first week lecture. So we say that you're gonna write some code over here in the editor and then compile, make sure there's no syntax or type error, and then gonna run it, right? So now when we say things crash, okay, whenever we say things crash, that means somehow your program somehow terminates abnormally, not normally, negative, right? Or it could be that your program actually terminates, but somehow the produced output is simply not as expected, right? So these are the two scenarios over here. You can see either you got some runtime exception, okay, or you got some logical error. However, in both cases over here, the assumption is your program simply terminates. It does not run forever. Okay, so that's the assumption I made. Because at the point I talk about this diagram here, we're only in the context of elementary programming. And you only have to worry about termination once you have to write loops in your program. So that's something we will get to starting from week number 4. So once we start our lecture. All right. So now let me respond briefly to your fellow student over here. Okay, there's something to correct over here. So an infinite loop. You can think about an infinite loop is simply does not terminate. All right. So what could be for those of you who might be who might have seen some loops before? Now, let me just give you one example. It could be that you say while integer I is equal to, let's say, 1. Okay, while loop, you may have seen that already. If you haven't, that's okay. I'm just trying to give some illustrate some point over here. And then over here, we can say, I'll just say print line, okay? Which means system and out print line. Okay, we simply want to print out the value for I, okay, for each iteration. And then over here, I simply say I++. So this will be one example for infinite loop. What's going to happen is, I would say, don't really try this on your machine. Don't try, because your machine will actually get somehow get very, very slow gradually. So that's not something you want to try. Just think about it conceptually, right? So this is going to generate some console output. It's going to print out 1, starting from 1, and then increment every time, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, because you will always be larger than 0. So you will never stop. All the way to until your machine actually died. Okay, so this will be one example for non-termination. Okay, this is like an infinite loop, just one simple case. But once you get to writing the loops for your labs and also for your programming test, maybe number 2 or number 3 later. So you always have to watch out for non-termination, because simple cases like this for infinite loop, you can easily avoid, right? You just make sure you always do the proper updates to the loop counter, we call, right? But that's something I will cover in the lecture, so you don't have to worry. I think once you get to the little bit more advanced methods to really program involving loops, you have to watch out for infinite loop, right? Something we'll get into later. All right. Okay, so in an infinite loop, consider terminating normally. I would say now this some category error over here. When you say an infinite loop, as I already explained to you, it does not terminate. So it wouldn't be considered as terminating abnormally. Not really, because it doesn't terminate, right? So I would say terminating normally over here. So I would say my response will be no, because infinite loop does not terminate by definitions. Do not terminate by definition. But the question is, I believe what your fellow student want to ask was, what kind of error is this? I would say it's just a part of the general error of logical error. Okay, you can think about an infinite loop. It's just a logical error. It's basically a logical error causing your program fail to terminate. So if you think about it, it's just a logical error, meaning that your program compiles, but once you run it, you will never terminate, right? So it's not really like an exception or like a producing an output that will not match the expected output, because it simply just doesn't terminate, right? By definition. All right, anybody want to ask some follow-up question to this? I think we'll talk more about non-termination later once we talk about loops. But since your fellow student asked, so I can talk about it briefly. Any questions about this? Anyone? Okay, all right. All right, I think, okay, we got 2 more, okay, 2 more. Okay, so now this question is important, okay? What is the difference between literals and also data types? And also data types. I will open the floor over here. This could be potentially an maybe written test questions, or it could be potentially an exam question, right? Before I give you my take, so anybody want to try to help your fellow student to clarify? Anybody want to try? So what's really the difference between literals and data types? Try the best you can. And then I will try to maybe help you. I'll give you some feedback on your answer. And then I'll give you my take as well at the end. Anybody want to try? You can think about it. I'll pause a bit here.
All right, can I try?
Armin, yes, definitely, please.
So I think a literal is a constant value and a data type is like a kind of variable, the type of the variable.
The type of variable, okay.
Like int or string.
Like a int or string?
Yeah.
Okay, that's from Armin. If you don't mind, I'll write your name down over here. Okay, thank you, Armin. Thank you. Anybody? Okay, take one more. Anybody want to try? Yeah, guys, don't be shy. Yeah, but no, you don't need to speak up, but if you want to. I will pause a little bit to see if anybody else want to speak up. Otherwise, we can discuss Armin's answer, and then I'll give you my take as well. Okay. Okay. Anyone else want to contribute? All right. If that's yeah, that's okay. I think so. Armin, I would say it's definitely on the right track. But there's some subtlety over here I would like to correct if you don't mind. Okay. So over here, I think when you say constant value over here, I think that's correct. Okay. So constant value simply means the value you can write directly on using your keyboard. For example, it can be maybe 1, 2, 3, and etc. So these are integer literal. Okay, I'll say lit over here. So some value you can write directly on the by using your keyboard. And also, for example, 2.3, 4.6. So these are, for example, double literal, like a floating point literal. And then you can also write maybe simply a and hash sign, single quote, and also at over here. So that would be the character literal. And finally, we can have things like a hash, or maybe it can be longer. So maybe a at b. That's a string literal. So I think what Armin says correct is really constant value, because whatever value you write is simply a constant. You can assign to something else, right? Maybe you can assign that to initialize a name constant, or you can assign the value to initialize a variable. That's okay, right? So I think the constant value part is actually pretty good, pretty accurate for literal. That's okay. However, for the data type over here, I think when you say data type is simply the type of variable over here, I think that's not wrong. However, I would like to make it a little bit more complete. Okay, let me just try to follow Armin's line of thought over here. Okay, let me write it down over here. So we can say, if I say integer I over here. By the way, you can say that in Java. So you don't, for name constant, you always have to initialize the value. But for variable, let's say without a final keyword over here, you can always just use this. Okay. So what this will do is it's going to I initialize to default value. And I spoke about the default value for integer briefly. So that should be simply 0. Okay, number 1. So now let's analyze this particular statement over here, this line. Okay, so now I, again, is the variable name. And the integer over here is simply data type, of course. So what Armin said is more like a type of the variable. I would say that's not really wrong, but that's not exactly complete. You can think about type of variable is simply the application, the usage, the application or usage of data type. So this is what you can use a data type for, but that's not really defining it, right? So that's the step, that's the missing detail for you. All right, so let me try to tell you my take to complete your answer over here. So now you can think about data type is really about the set of values that I, in this case, because that's the variable name we want to declare to be of type integer, that I can store or can be assigned to, right? Either way, let me say store. They can store at runtime. Thinking this way, for those of you, I'm not sure how many, maybe all of you, you might be taking the 1019 course about the logic in computer science. If you're not, that's okay. You might have, you guys might know about the concept for a set, right? For example, you can think about a set is simply a collection of stuff over here. So now you can think about the data type over here, integer. When I say it's a set of values, so you will be starting from, for example, -5, -4, -3, all the way to maybe 0. From that, you get 1, and then 2, and then 3. A collection of values over here. Okay, that's a set. And this will be the data type for integer. So these are all the set of values that each one of them may be assigned to I. But any value that's outside of this set, you cannot get assigned to the I. For example, another set would be maybe the set for, let's say, character literal. For example, for the character literal, it will be the set of values that's within a single quote. It could be a space, it could be A, it could be B, and etc. All the possibility theoretically. Okay. So now I think that the complete answer would be to say data type is simply like a set of values that can be stored at a particular variable you're trying to declare, okay, at a runtime. And then, depending on what data type it is, you will restrict what a set should be. For example, if you declare the type to be, let's say, integer, in that case, it will be this particular set where you can choose a value to assign I over here. Any value outside the set, you cannot assign that. Okay. So Armin, do you think it makes sense to you, to your answer?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Or let me just make it even simpler for you, but I was always trying to talk about the entire answer first. Literals over here, like a single value. Data types, a set of allowable value. I like this question a lot. I think it's really important for you to clarify the difference between a literal over here and also a data type is really important, right? And also think about data type is the set, the collection of all the values allowed to be assigned to that particular variable using the data type to declare. All right. Okay, let me just do one more thing over here. Integer I is assigned to, let's say, something over here. All right. We know that this is the data type. Which means only integer value can be stored to I at runtime. And more precisely, integer is simply the set of integers. All right, so now we want to know, let's say you want to write something over here. In order for this particular variable assignment to be valid, here is the following, here's the requirement, okay? In order for this assignments to be valid, the blue box over here, right? Think about the blue box, like the blue box over here, the right-hand side. Must be a value in the integer data type, the set. And now, what kind of value can you actually put over here? You can put 23, like a literal. That's pretty much the same question as we just clarified. Okay, number one. Or it could be another variable j over here is the right-hand side, right? We talk about sources for reassignments for your lecture number one. You can also put j, assuming that j is also declared to be integer. Right, so that means any value that's stored in j is guaranteed to be also integer. So that's also fine, right? Another possibility would be it can be some integer expression. So it could be, for example, 23, maybe modulo 4. That's also fine, right? So we got 1, 2, and 3. So all three are fine. You can also try to read in some integer from maybe the console, from the keyboard as well. On the other hand, if you say, for example, 23, let's say larger than 4, right? So now, Armin, let me ask you this, okay? So now, what if I say integer I is initialized to be 23 larger than 4? Would this be okay?
No, it will.
Why? Why not?
Actually, because 23 larger than 4 is a Boolean value, but you're saying it's an int, so you're putting a Boolean in an
exactly,
int.
Exactly right. Okay, so guys, for those of you who are not too sure what Boolean is, that's exactly part B of your week 2 lecture. So you will get there, hopefully sometime this week. Okay, so this is so-called relational operation, but this expression here is of type Boolean, either true or false. So you cannot store into I because I is declared to be integer data type. So Boolean is simply not one of the value that's allowed in the integer collection, right? So that's why it's illegal, right? So I think I try to generalize the discussion about literals versus data type into whenever you're trying to declare some variable of certain type over here, you want to make sure whatever right-hand side value you're trying to assign to the variable, they must be compatible with the declared data type. So that's the bottom line you want to know.
Professor,
Yes,
may I ask a related question?
go ahead, please.
I just wanted to quickly ask, what's the consequence of storing an integer data in a double in a variable that's declared a double type?
Yeah, sure, no problem. The question was, there are two questions over here, basically, right? So let's say if I declare double, let's say D. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. Slightly more interesting. Integer I is assigned to 23, and then I. Okay, we know very well, excuse me, we know very well after this line over here is going to, let's visualize that, it's gonna basically create a box over here, I is declared to be of data type integer, which means only integer value. Think about integer values without the decimal, without the fractional part. So now 23 is going to be stored inside, right? That's basically the orange line is going to do for you. So now, is it Michael who asked asking me the question? Is it Michael?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, Michael, yes, let me ask you this. Good. Just want to make sure. So Michael, here's a question. There are two things over here. Number one, will this line compile?
That's what I want to ask. So when I ask the question,
okay, sure. Okay, let me try to lead you. Maybe let me try to either lead you or mislead you a little bit. Okay, I over here always when you want to think about variable assignments, what's the type? The type is also very important. So now I over here was declared to be integer, and the D over here was declared to be double. It seems like integer is not compatible with double simply because they're different types. But Michael, is that the case?
Sorry, did you ask me if that's okay?
Yeah, so let me give you a little bit hints over here. It seems to me integer and double, you can see the integer is the type of I, the right-hand side for the assignment, the source. And double is of type, D is of type double, and D is the target for the assignment. It seems to me integer and double are simply different types. So would you conclude that the variable assignment here is simply not legal? Would you or would you not?
The way that you explained it, it doesn't sound illegal.
Yeah, exactly, but maybe I'm tricking you, right? Yeah, you're right. Okay, good. Okay, so now, okay, let me not put you on the spot. Okay, let me get to your question here. So now, guys, it looks like even though integer and double, even though they're different types, I agree. So one is just integer, the other one is floating point. However, they are just numbers, right? So even though they are different, but they are not that different, they somehow share some similarity. Okay. So now in Java, okay, whenever you want to assign an integer into a double over here, okay, let's say this. Let's say over here, draw better. All right, so let's say D over here, it should be a double, right? Which means any number storing over here should be of the form some integral part dot fractional part, right? So now let's say I is actually 23. So now, is it possible to really store 23 into here to have this format? It is possible. You can simply say 23 will just be the integral part, and then we add 0 after the dot. So that'll be 23.0. So this process is done automatically by Java called coercion. Some of you already mentioned that in the chat. Pretty good. All right. So this is something called coercion. So Michael, you may want to refer to, let me look it up for you, okay? If you, let me drag the course page over here. If you go to part E of week number 1, so this will be where you should really maybe rewatch again. So this part exactly tells you, if you want to assign integer to double, or if you want to assign double to integer, what's going to happen? So that will be what you should really pay attention to. So Michael, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Yes.
Very good. Okay, so again, briefly speaking, this is valid. However, something called coercion will actually happen automatically. And exactly what's going to happen is it's going to be added 0.0 to the integer value, right? But the other way, if I say integer over here, and then I say some double value over here, it's going to be a different story. So for those of you who may not be sure, I will encourage you to look at part E of week number 1 lecture about casting versus coercion. And if you got questions, you still got tomorrow to ask me. Okay, it's a very important concept. All right. All right, guys. Any more question about literals, data types, coercion, and etc.? Any more? Any more questions? Sarah was asking some question over here. Let's try it out. Okay, that may be some interest to everybody. Let me say just under console application. Let's try it. Let's say compare integer and double. So let's say this. Integer I is 23. Double I is 23.0. All right, two numbers over here. Oh, sorry, J. That is a D. Yeah. Of course, you can have the variable of the same name. So now let's say I want to compare these two numbers using relational operator. Let's say equal. Can I do that? All right. Let's now say the following. So now let's say I equals D. What should be the value, right? So that's the, let me just show it to you. So now I want to compare them. So I can say I equals D. And then I may just want to make sure I do that first. So this is to force the order of evaluation. So when you actually go over week number 2 Java tutorial video, I believe in part A, I talk about how you can use the parentheses to force the order of evaluation. So that'll be similar what I talk about, right? You can refer to that as well, all right? All right, so guys, you can see apparently compiles, right? Right? You can see there's no error over here, meaning that it is okay to actually compare some integer with some double somehow by Java. It is just okay. However, is it going to be true or false? That's our question, right? Without letting us guess, let's try. No, you just got some other errors, right? For this class, I think we're okay. It's actually true. All right. You can think about what's happening over here is when we compare 23 together with 23.0, in that case, since the fractional part for 23, well, thinking this way, when we are doing this, you can think about implicitly, I is actually coerced to 23.0. In that case, it's not exactly the same as, I is going to be coerced automatically to 23.0. So this is why when you compare these two numbers, they are exactly the same. All right. All right, just something that Sarah mentioned that in the chat. All right. All right. So any more questions? No problem. Guys, I think Sarah is doing something exactly right. So anytime you're wondering about whether a particular idea that you're thinking about, should that work or not, always try it out on the Eclipse. And then if you're not too sure about how to type it out or how to set it up, you can always get in touch with me. Try it, and then the consequence may not be something you would have expected. And then if you're puzzled about the consequence, you can always get in touch with me as well. That'll be the right way to learn about programming. All right, we got one more. Hey, one more over here. It's, again, a very good question over here, but this one will actually require me to get a little bit of look ahead of what we're going to talk about in this class. But I'll try not to give you too many details so that your fellow student wouldn't get confused, okay? Let's read it together. Are there any local and global variables in Java? The answer is yes. okay? Or they are simply just variables and name constant, okay? I think just from the question here, there might be some confusion over here, right? I would like to say the following. So when we say variables over here and also name constant, we are basically saying you have a box over here. And the box may be I. In that case, you make up 23 to begin with. And then if there's a variable, you can change the value from 23 into 46, right? It's a variable. On the other hand, you might just get another name constant, maybe called a pi. Once you initialize that to be 3.14, you just cannot rewrite the value, right? That's the difference between variable versus name constant. That's one dimension, right? So that's about the dimension between variables and name constant. You can think about it simply like a placeholder for you to store some value, just about storage. Whether or not you can really change the value in the storage is the difference between variables and name constant. That's number one. And now, when you talk about local versus global, that's an independence dimension we are talking about. Two dimensions over here, right? One dimension is about how you store the value. Okay, let me write it down, and I'll get to the scope. Okay, and then the other dimension over here is about the scope. I will talk more about the scope in the coming week's lecture. In your week number 3 lecture, there will be one part about how you can look at the scope of the variable. But I can explain that very quickly just to give you some idea. The scope over here is really about how visible it is. For example, if I actually got this particular box called I, is it visible across all the classes? Or is it visible across all the methods inside a particular class? Or is it only visible inside a particular method, right? That's really the question, all right? So now, let me just give you some illustration over here, just to answer your fellow student question. But I think the bottom line, the short answer is, there are local and also global variables. However, when you talk about local global variables and also variables and name constant, these 4 things are not in the same category of concept over here. Okay. All right. I think Paul needs say zero battery, so they gotta leave us right now. That's okay. Just watch the recording later. All right. All right. So now let me say this. So think about local and also global and also variable and also name constant. They simply belong to 2 categories of concept. One is about storage, and the other one is about visibility, right? Let me talk about the scope over here. That'll be the last discussion to have today, unless you got more questions. So I would say the scope of variables. And for the purpose of illustration, I would suggest I use a model class. Let's say utilities, or maybe circle. Let's say circle. Let's say just say utility. Okay. So public class utilities. Okay. So let me declare 2 utility methods. Public, let's say static, and then I would say integer. Let me just say M1, method 1, okay? And then that one there also got some parameters for input. I can say double, let's say D1. Let's say inside the method we declare some local variable. Let's say maybe double. Let's say result 1 is simply equal to maybe D1 over here. And then integer, let's say I1 is, so now if you want to assign double to integer, you got to do a cast, right? That's something you should know from week number 1. So I would say it's going to be cast into result 1 over here. Double result. Okay, that's good. And then I'm just going to return over here I1. Okay, guys, I think so far the method is not too bad, right? Hopefully you're okay with this. But the main thing I want to illustrate will be about the scope. Before I do that, okay, I'm just going to do the following. I want to put two methods that are somehow similar into the same class. So what I will do is I'm just going to, bear with me, I'm going to set it up very quickly. Copy this and put it here. Apparently that might be a little bit too big. Let me make it even smaller. Okay, I hope it's still visible to you. Okay, and then I'm gonna have another, I'm gonna rename, don't worry. Okay, we got two methods over here. We got blue and we got green. All right. And then for the blue one, it's simply just M1, D1, result 1, I1, right? And now for method number 2, I'm going to say M2 over here. And also, it's going to be D2. And then result 2. And then this one is going to be D2. And also local variable over here, I'm going to say I2. And then it's going to be cast from result 2. And then return I2. All right, that's it. All right, so this is the method I would like to talk about. Okay, we got two methods, right? So now we got utilities under which we got M1 and also M2. So now we want to talk about the scope of the variables. So now let's first of all talk about parameters. Remember this, let me use, yeah, I think green is fine. So remember D1 is a parameter, right? Input. And similarly for D2, what's the scope? When I say scope, I mean under what context can you actually refer to D1? Let me show you right away. I'm going to use green. For D1 over here, the scope is going to be the entire method over here. Similarly, let's say over here, when I talk about D2, the scope is going to be like over here. The scope. All right. So now, if I try, hypothetically, right? Hypothetically, if I try to say double result 1, alternatively, rather than D1, if I say D2, this is going to be a compile time error because now we are now in the scope of this particular method over here, but you're now referring to D2, which belongs to a separate scope over here. So that's why it's not valid. All right, I hope everybody's okay so far. Okay, one more. Okay. And now if you look at, let's say, result number 1. What's the scope for result number 1? Apparently, we only declare result 1 inside the context of M1. So that means the scope will be just the same as D1. So it's going to be just the same scope over here, just the same. Just the same. Similarly, so now if I try, let's say result number 2 over here, is only declared within this method over here. So the scope is also going to be just within this method over here. So that means, for example, hypothetically, if I say over here, if I say result 1, okay, let me write a little bit better, is simply reassigned to, let's say D1, let's say D2. Let's see why this assignment simply wouldn't be valid is because you can see D2 over here is actually referring to the D2, which is in this particular scope. So this is okay. On the other hand, inside this particular method, we are referring to result 1, which belongs to just another different scope, which is only declared over here. That's why it will just be invalid. Guys, any questions so far? I talk about basically the scope for input parameters, which is only only visible to within their corresponding method. And case number 2, I talk about any local variables you may declare inside the method, like a result1 or result2, and the scope will be just within that particular method, right? Not outside. All right. Any questions so far? And then before I say one more thing about global variable in just a moment. Anything else you want to say? All right, so now let me say one more thing. What about global variables? Global variable simply means is it possible to really have a variable is it possible to have a global variable so that the scope is going to go across the methods, i.e., it's going to be the scope that covers the entire class like that. Is it possible? The answer is yes. It is okay. It is possible to really declare the global variable that actually can be reused in all the methods. Okay. So now in this case, for example, I can simply declare I can simply public, static, and also integer, and then I can say maybe just initialize that to be 23. So now if I do if I simply declare I forgot to give a name. Integer, let's say I is 23, right? So now in this case, you can see I over here, the scope for I is really outside of this particular method, also outside of this particular method, which means it's going to be this much larger scope over here. So now in this case, consequently, if I really want to use this particular variable, I can refer to it over here. I can say, for example, I is reassigned to 46. I can do that. So this will be okay. And also in this method over here, I can also say I is assigned to maybe 96. That's also fine. So now for global variables, actually there will be a little bit more complexity to it, which I want to mention very quickly, but not really too much detail. You can see the global variable we declare over here has static. Okay. However, there is another possibility to really declare another variable kind. Let's say public integer j. Let's say this is just another line we're adding over here. So this will be so-called non-static. So there are two kinds of global variables, either static or non-static. There are two kinds of global variables. However, you don't have to worry about anything about this until we introduce objects orientation after the reading week. For now, you can safely assume for all the labs and for all the programming tests, at least before the reading week or shortly after reading week, we'll be making it explicit. For now, you don't really need anything about global variable. All you need will be, you have to say, in order for me to program a particular method, what variables do I have? Number one, you got all the parameters, like a D1, D2, whatever you declare inside the parameter, right? Number one. Number two, you can declare as many local variables as you like inside this particular method. And then those variables are only visible within this particular method. So these are the principles you should know just for now. And later on, after the reading week, once we introduce classes and objects for object orientation, we'll change we'll extend this notion here, maybe a little bit more, but later, not for now. All right. Guys, any question about this? Oh, guys, by the way, yeah, Joseph, you actually raised your hand, but please just speak up. I may not really watch out who's raising hands. Just speak up if you wish.
For double result 2 is equal to D2, since it's outside of the scope of public static int M1, can't you result M1 in that?
Okay, so Joseph, okay, let me take it slowly. Are you talking about this line over here?
Yeah, that line.
That one there is actually okay. You can see D2 is referring to the D2 over here. So you can always, within the scope for your method over here, you can always refer to the parameter, number one. And number two, in this scope over here, we're just introducing one new variable, result2. So that's okay.
But can we use the same variable as the previous
You
method?
mean, can you, for example, you're saying that, okay, let's say alternatively, let me now say this. So do we have time? Yeah, we do have time. Let's try this. So guys, I think this example might be worth playing with. So what I will do is I'll start with some program over here, and then we can play with it quickly. Very quickly. So now let's say utilities, we got something over here. Oh, I don't want to mess up with it. So now new class. Utilities. 3. All right. Let's do this example very quickly, and then we are done. Okay. Actually, kind of go beyond what your fellow student was asking, so we can build up, the discussion. So now let's talk about the scope. Public static integer m1 double d1, and then double result1 is d1, and then we got integer i1 is the cast version of result1, and then return I1. All right, so that's the first method, right? Exactly what I did previously, over exactly the same. All right. Now let me try the following, and then I'll try to build up on Joseph's question. M2, D2, result2, D2, result2, I2, I2 over here. All right, let's now take a look at this, right? So that's the same code, okay? So now let's say this. First of all, to Joseph's question over here, you can see this line over here, there's no compile time error, as you can see. The reason is because result number 2 is simply just a new variable we're declaring over here. And then D2, you can see is referring to the input parameter, so that's okay. Let's try something that wouldn't work. I'll give you something that will also work. Let's try different possibilities, okay? So this is valid. Okay, let me comment it out. What if I say double, let's say result 2 is D1. Right? That's the example I just illustrated to you. You can see D1 over here. You might be thinking that I want to refer to D1 over here, but that's not possible because, as I visualized to you, the D1 over here, the scope is only visible within this particular method. But if you're trying to do it over here, it's simply not possible, right? So I would say invalid. D1's scope is only within M1, right? M1 over here, okay? Okay, let me also comment this out. Okay, you can comment them back later to try. Another one, maybe that's what Joseph was suggesting before. If I say double result 1 is, let's say D2, and then of course, let's say as soon as I change this to be result 1, first of all, let's say this. Can we just ignore line 14 just for now? Okay, only focus on line number 13 over here. Only focus on this. So guys, why is line number 13 okay? You might be thinking, we said before in the elementary programming, we say that you cannot declare the same variable twice. You can see we're declaring result 1 over here. We are also declaring result 1 over here. Why can we actually declare the same variable twice without getting an error?
Professor?
Yes, please.
Is it because they're in separate scopes?
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yes. Okay. Exactly. What's your name again?
Michael.
Michael. Oh, Michael. Good. Good. Yeah. Sorry. Sometimes it's hard to associate sound with your name. Anyway, so Michael.
Don't worry.
Michael was exactly right. So basically, what I tried to do was, let's say in this particular scope, we have a variable called result 1. If you also change this to be result 1 as well, that's okay. It's not really considered as redecoration because they are in different scope. And when you got different scopes, the declarations of the variable are completely independent. They're not going to affect each other, right? On the other hand, on the other hand, right, I'm going to go back here. So I would say, first of all, this will be valid because result 1 in M1 and result 1 in M2 are in different scopes. Okay, that's important, right? Let me also comment this out, right? And then let me just do what there are two things I want to do. Another thing to ask you about. Guys, we understand why line number 13 will be okay, because result 1 and the result 1 over here, they simply belong to two different scopes. So there's no conflict, there's no clash. But now, why is line number 14 not compiled? Used to, but why not anymore?
Because it does not match the variable result 1 in the same
Sorry,
scope.
can you speak up a little bit? I'm just can I hear you?
It does not match the new variable of result 1 in M2.
Okay, it's not match. Okay, I think what you're saying is it's not match. For example, result 2 is not really matching result 1 here, for example, right? I think that's what you meant. However, I'm not exactly satisfied with the answer. Okay, so let me help you a little bit. You want to say the following. Every time you want to use on the right hand side some variable over here, you want to make sure every variable you use has been declared already. Okay, so the correct answer should be there is an error over here simply because result 2 was not declared in the current scope. You can see result 2 is not declared over here because only result 1 has been declared, but now result 2. Okay, so now I want to say this. Not valid because result 2 is not declared in the scope of M2. You might be saying, oh, yeah, so now would it work? Let me ask you this. Would it solve the problem if I simply declare result 2 over here? Perfect. Apparently it doesn't work, right? Guys, you see what I'm trying to do here? You said, oh, so Jackie, you said to me, result 2 doesn't work simply because result 2 was not declared. But what if I declare result 2 over here? No, it wouldn't work. Because remember, declaring some variable in this scope has nothing to do with any use of the variable in this scope. So it wouldn't help. Okay, put a comment here. This would not help resolve the error in line number 15 because M1 and M2 are different scope. So guys, I hope you see my point over here. Okay, I think that's very nice. I really like the question you're asking me about the scope. I think maybe that this question over here will be very relevant to what you're gonna see in the coming lecture and possibly tutorial videos. That's very relevant. Okay, so I would say study this example here. It might be covered maybe later in your written test or exam. Okay, maybe. Right. So I think you got time to get prepared. One more error I want to show you, and then we should call it a day, I think. One more. And then, so now, this is actually something we talk about in the lecture. I just want to do it in front of the computer together with you. If I say double result 1 is D1, let's say maybe 23.4. So now you will also know why this line. So you know what? That should be line 16 already. So I want to change that. Otherwise, you'll get confused. So now here, this line here, apparently you should know why this will be an error, right? You can see in the same scope over here, I'm declaring result 1 and result 1. That's not allowed. In the same scope, you cannot declare variables of the same name. However, for result number 2, it will be okay to declare that twice, right? Because it's simply because, result 2 over here, if you comment this out, you will be okay to declare result 2 and also result 2 over here. If you want. Over here, if you do it, it's going to be okay because result 2 and result 2 over here, they simply belong to different scope. So that'll be okay. All right. Okay, anyway, so I will just put this into comments. So guys, I would suggest I'm gonna make this code available to you. Play with different combinations of the variables and try to understand if that's really working. All right. All right, let me switch back to the notes. I think that's about all the questions I have received. There might be some questions remaining in the Google Doc. It's just maybe putting a little bit too late. I'll try to cover them maybe tomorrow. But for now, in theory, we can go until 4:30. But I know you might be exhausted. For those of you who stayed almost 2 hours, I appreciate it. But now, do you have any more questions for me? You can feel free. I can address them quickly.
Can I ask a very quick question?
Of course.
I just want to ask, if you mess up the establishment of the main method code, you said in lab 0 the code that you don't need to worry about, like that's a given, at least for now, like with like the scanning and stuff like that in the keyboard, is that considered a syntax or type error, or is it neither?
I'm not too sure exactly what you meant. You're saying that, can you say it again? I don't quite get your question, actually.
I mean, if we mess up the spelling of the public static void and like the RGS, and we like wait.
Yeah.
So like if we mess that up, is that considered a syntax or a type error?
Okay, now I see what you mean. I think it would be a syntax error most likely. For example.
Okay.
Yeah, I think let me illustrate just for your fellow student quickly. Let's say my app number 2. Okay. Let's say somehow you forgot to actually put this. Let's say you forgot, but typically when you create your console application in Eclipse, you can just choose the main method, right? Just let's say you forgot, right? Okay, so now you got to type it out, right? I would say if you really are in this situation here, unless you're very experienced with Java, I would say simply copy and paste from some other console application class you developed before. Okay, that'll be safer. Okay. So now let me say this. Okay, so for example, you might say public guys. Doesn't it look like I have typed correctly? But errors. What's wrong here? I got public, I got static, I got void, I got main, I got string capitalized, I got a pair of square brackets, I got arcs. What's wrong?
Yeah, Armin's right.
Should be public static void.
Should be public static void, exactly. Thank you. Right. So I think so. Back to Michael's question here. So I would say when you try to type it yourself, yeah, I think if you type it wrong, I think most likely it's going to be syntax error. Most likely. So I think so. You might be wondering why would it make a difference over here, right? So here void static versus static void, right? Let me leave this in comments so you can remind you in case you got to type it out. Yeah, I would say for this course, I'm not too sure if I ever get a chance to say it. Typically in the introductory Java course, I don't think it would be necessary for you to know exactly what this really means, okay? You don't need to worry. I think the only thing that will be clear to you later in the course, maybe starting from week number 3 or 4. So this will be something called array. That's something we'll talk about, don't worry, okay? But for now, my point is, for this particular line over here, in case you got to type it out, simply copy and paste from somewhere else that you got already. But for the programming test, we will not ask you to type this line to waste your time. Don't worry. All right. Of course, if somehow you kind of mess up with your console application class given to you, then you got to be careful, right? So just make sure you don't delete any lines from the code that we give to you. All right. All right, guys. Any more questions?
I do have one more, but I don't want to over.
No, it's okay. You know, if your fellow student are willing to stay, they will stay. Go ahead, please.
Okay, this is my very last question. It's in the Google Doc, but it wasn't addressed. So
oh yeah, that's okay. Just tell me. Okay. Just tell me.
For unary operators,
yeah,
operand. If the operand is open bracket 24 divided by 7 closing parentheses, that was.
Okay, let me write it down exactly, Michael. Okay.
That's a single operand, right?
Which one?
24 over 7 and in brackets.
Okay, 24. Okay. 24 over 7.
Right.
Okay, and then brackets.
Yeah. That's a single operand. Is that considered a single operand or no?
Good question. Okay, so I would say, you know what? Okay, first of all, let's see. We know that this is a binary operator. We know very well. And then this is the left operand. And this is the right operand. I'm pretty sure you're okay with this. Okay, so now you're asking me, let's say we consider the entire expression over here. Should we call this an operand? That's what you're asking. So my answer would be no. Unless it is used. It is used in the context of another operator.
Like minus.
For example, yes, exactly. So you see my point, right? So you can see if you only got the orange part, let's say you only got this part over here, you cannot say this is simply an operand because there's no operator, right? You can say this is the left operand, this is the right operand because you know they are associated with the division operator, so that's okay. But once you get to this part over here, overall, about this entire expression, it's not an operand yet, right? Not yet. So what should it be? You can only say it's an expression. You can say this is an integer because you evaluate to some integer expression, which can be used by a unary operator. Sorry, let me spell correctly. Unary operator or partly by a binary operator. Okay, so now let me illustrate that very quickly. So now let's say this. This is what we got so far. As Michael said, if you simply say minus over here, so we are really using, in this case, we're really using this as the operand for the unary operator for minus. Okay, or alternatively, you can say, I can simply say 23 plus this. In that case, this will be the right operand for this plus operator. So Michael, makes sense to you?
Yes.
Very good. Yeah.
So what if you get rid of the brackets and you still have the minus sign in front?
Okay, good. Another good question here. So now you're basically saying, let's say we got expression number 1. You got 24 divided by 7 minus, right? And then number 2, you got minus, let's say without a parenthesis. Very good question. So now this, remember, parenthesis is going to force the order of evaluation. So that means we are going to calculate this first before we can apply the minus. Okay? And then, so that means over here, let's calculate this. What's 24 divided by 7? Michael, what's 24 divided by 7?
3 remainder, 3?
Yeah, I agree. 3, pretty good. Yes. But remember, both are integers, so we're only going to get a quotient. So this is going to evaluate just to 3, the quotient only. And then you're going to apply the minus to the 3. So eventually you get minus 3. Okay, that's good. All right. And then what about this guy over here? This guy over here. So now the question is, should we apply minus first or should we apply division first? Okay, so this is something called a precedence of the operator. So now you can think about whenever you got minus over here, it's going to get bind tighter itself. So that means we're going to do this first and then divided by 7. Okay, so but the quotient is just going to be minus 3 as well. So this, in this way, it doesn't make a difference for the final result. However, the way to evaluate it is a little bit different. In case number 1, you evaluate this first and then apply the minus. And then for number 2, you apply minus and then you divide. but the result is simply the same.
May I ask, is it valid to say that the minus operator applies only to the 24 operand?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Very good.
All right.
So now you can say that you're right. So now you can think about, okay. So now for number one over here, the operand of minus is 24 divided by 7. And then for number two over here, operand of minus is 24. Yeah, so they're different.
Okay.
You're right. Correct.
All right. That's all my questions. Thank you so much.
No problem. No problem. Okay. So guys, any more questions? Any more? All right. So that's our very first Q&A for the semester. I hope you find it clear. Okay. So yeah, guys, no problem. So I think so this is really a session created for you. So don't worry about asking any question you might consider, I quote, silly or stupid. There's no stupid question in the class. All right. So anything you want to ask, just ask. All right. So Armin, you got your hand raised, but I can just speak up quickly. Yes.
Right. You said this is the first Q&A in the semester, but wasn't there one last week?
You're right. Second. Yeah. Yeah. Precision is important. Yes, absolutely. The very first Q&A for your lectures. How about that? The very first one. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, guys, I appreciate your stay. I don't think it's going to be a very large group throughout the semester. Based on my experience from last term, it's understandable. Everybody got their agenda. So I would say for you, you may not be able to attend every time. If you do, I appreciate that. But I would say every time you do come, just ask any question you might have. You don't need to get prepared in order to come. All right, thank you. Okay, I should stop here. And then for those of you who might come tomorrow, I'll see you tomorrow. Otherwise, good luck. And then get in touch with me if you got any questions. All right, see you later. Take care.